بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
The levels of Qadar, maratib al-Qadar. And so the first level of Qadar is Allah's knowledge of all particulars, of all His creation. Allah's knowledge of all things. And what we're saying is Allah's the term here I think they use is what? Eternal knowledge. Let's say eternal knowledge. His primordial knowledge, right? His knowledge that is part of His essence, that He knew all the affairs of His creation. All the measures and events and what would happen, how they would happen. And this precedes His creation. Before He created anything, Allah Ta'ala had full knowledge of everything to its finest detail. Not just things that would happen, even the things that could have happened. All of the possibilities, right? If you watch, these movies nowadays, right? Timelines, they present them as realities, right? They're not realities, but they're possibilities, right? Allah Ta'ala had knowledge of all of the possibilities. Allah's knowledge precedes all of His creation, and He's aware of everything. Nothing escapes Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is and that is in the Quran. Inna Allah bi kulli shayin alim, right? Allah Ta'ala is aware of everything. La yakhfa alayhi shay, nothing hides from Him, right? Allah Ta'ala knows what you do. He's aware. Wallahu khabirun bima ta'malun. He's aware of everything that you do. I mentioned this, and you're going to see that Imam Al-Tahāwīyah mentions this because there have been sects within Islam who have argued that no, Allah Ta'ala knows everything except the actions of His servants, and that is knowledge that He acquires as His servants make decisions and they decide their acts. This is the belief of the deviant group called the Qadariyah that emerged in early Islam during the time of Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And so Imam Al-Tahāwīyah will mention this, that no, that this is contrary to the belief. Even Abdullah bin Umar, some of the Salaf, they approached him and they said, we hear this statement being said that, about Qadar, and Abdullah bin Umar says, tell them that I am free of them, and that the Messenger ﷺ said this and this and this, refuting that sect. And so that is a deviant, that is a sect that deviated. And their belief was that Allah Ta'ala doesn't know He knows everything except the acts of His servants until they do them, and that's when He knows what His servants will do. And so that's a deviant belief of a sect of Islam that is not the creed of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. It contradicts the explicit ayat of the Quran and also a hadith. And so that's the first level of Qadar. The reason, somebody might ask, why did they adopt that? Because they felt, their reasoning was, sorry, let me step back. Their reasoning was that if they say Allah knew all the actions of His servants before they do them, then His servants don't really have free choice. It negates their free choice. That's kind of their reasoning. So it isn't just we're just going to make up some idea. They had some logic that they were using. They're like, well, if Allah knows everything, and He knows everything that will occur, then therefore we don't really have a choice. Then that can't be true because Allah says we do have a choice. Does that make sense? And so that's why they said, okay, then Allah Ta'ala doesn't know everything. He doesn't know our acts. And so that is their reason. Ahlul Sunnah refuted them. And the companions, Abdullah bin Umar and many others, and there's even a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ speaks of a group of people that will emerge of that mindset, and so it is a deviant belief. It doesn't negate. Ahlul Sunnah say no, believing that Allah knows all things doesn't negate the free choice of people. It doesn't negate the free choice of Allah's creation, right? So they reconciled those issues and they defended it based on Quran and sound reason. I didn't want to dive into that, but I think it's worth mentioning why this part of belief is so important, because of the deviance that has occurred in the past because of in regards to this. The second level of Iman and Qadar is belief in everything has been pre-recorded. So the recording of all affairs that will be till the end of Qiyamah, till the end of, to the end of time, till Qiyamah. And we have the hadith, right, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Awwal ma khalaq Allah," the first thing that Allah created was the pen, and He commanded it to write everything that will be till Qiyamah. So in the book, everything has been recorded, right? And so, interestingly, like our Prophet ﷺ, like he was given, right? He saw events of the future. He saw that his ummah would conquer Yemen and Persia and Rome. He saw Jannah and the people of Jannah, and he saw hell and the people of hell, right? And so he was given sight of the affairs of the future. So all of this has been recorded. Allah Ta'ala is fully aware, knowledgeable, and has recorded everything that will occur. And so everything is recorded, and in the hadith he said what? رُفِعَتِ الْأَقْلَامُ وَجَفَّتِ الصُّحُفُ. The pens have been lifted and the ink has dried, or the pages have dried. And so everything has been recorded and with Allah Ta'ala in Kitab, in the mother book. Kitab is the mother book. There's another book that's mentioned, which is the preserved tablet, al-Lawh al-Mahfuz. Scholars debate, is the Lawh al-Mahfuz and Kitab the same book, or are they separate books? But Kitab is the grandest book. And it's a book above the throne of Allah Ta'ala. And all the affairs of the creation have been recorded. And then there's a book in a lower level, Lawh al-Mahfuz. And so that is one position. The other position, the preserved tablet, is a separate book than Kitab, is one position. That is the position that one of my teachers, that I personally follow, Sheikh Al-Dado. But if you look at the literature, I find that many of our early scholars, they lean towards the position that Kitab and Lawh al-Mahfuz are the same book. They're not separate books. But regardless of that difference, everything has been recorded, right? Are there two books or are there one? Now, there are other forms of recording as well. There are other forms of recording. And subhanAllah, as we go through this, we're seeing that Allah's predetermination of all things, it isn't just Allah knows it and now it's happening. Allah Ta'ala has a system, if we can say, that in which, and this is, we see it with Allah's creation, everything is systemized. There's structure. Not that Allah needs it, but that Allah Ta'ala runs the affairs of His creation through these structures. Although He says His command is simply what? Be, and it becomes. But when He created the heavens and the earth, He created it in what? 6 days. Well, why not just be and become? When He created human beings, He could have created all of humanity, every single individual, to exist at one time. Or to exist at different centuries and just everybody live out their lives and Qiyamah. But He created a system where there's succession, there's reproduction, there's this, there's growth, right? And so on and so forth. Everything of Allah. Giving victory to His prophets and messengers. He could have given to them victory right away. But He lets events happen through a natural system. And so our scholars mention that Allah Ta'ala veils His Qudra in asbab, in causes and effects. As a way to show us, to teach us, one is that the scholars, they say, there are many benefits. One is that Allah Ta'ala is teaching us that our world isn't a world of miracles. Our world is a world of systems. So you have to act and build and develop. And you can't just get to a goal by being wishful. There's a process. Allah created everything through the process, and if you want things to work in this world, you must follow the process that it has, or the process that it works by. Does that make sense? And even in the unseen world, right? Allah Ta'ala has a system. The system, first Allah knows all things, but then He created Kitab. In it everything is recorded. And then from al-Kitab, let's say al-Kitab and Lawh al-Mahfuz are the same, just to kind of avoid, to make it just simpler. Then there's the distribution of Qadar, and there's the recording of Qadar that the Malaika are granted. There's the records of Qadar that Malaika are granted. And those Qadar are not singular. The Qadar is actually diverse. Meaning that if, let's say, if Muhammad was to do this and this and this, his lifespan would go up by that much. And if he didn't do this, his lifespan would end at this time, and that would be the time of his death. For example, and that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, sadaqah increases your lifespan, for example. So there are in the records of Qadar that the Malaika have, because the Malaika are the agents of Allah that execute the Qadar. Right? The Malaika are the agents of Allah that execute the Qadar. There is Malakul Maut. He's the the angel in charge of death. He's not the single angel that's taken the lives of people. He is the leading angel that leads an army of angels that are in charge of this life and of this death. So that's one. There's Mikael. Actually, the Yahud, they don't like Jibril, and they like Mikael, right? In the Jewish teachings. Even the Quran describes it. قُلْ مَنْ كَانَ عَدُوًّا لِجِبْرِيلَ, who say the one who takes Jibril is an enemy. Because they said Jibril, he brought down, executed the punishments of Allah. And Mikael, he's the angel in charge of sustenance and rizq. And now he has a whole army of angels that distribute the arzaq, that distribute the provisions. And they run affairs of provision, sustenance, rain, agriculture, all these things. We just see the physical world, but these are the malaika, that they are malaika, a creation of Allah Ta'ala, that Allah Ta'ala uses in the unseen, because none of these things have powers of their own. Right? The cloud of itself doesn't, right, the water evaporating from the sea, from our physical world, where water evaporates from the sea because the heat of the sun, it forms clouds, the winds carry it, okay, it pours down, whatever. We have a whole system from a physical world. But there's a world beyond the physical. Worlds that the malaika they work in. And so the malaika work in these systems, and they're executing the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that make sense? And that is, it's its own world. It's different than our world. Our world is but it has its own system. And so these malaika, with the qadr they've been given, they have, qadr isn't just like one thing. There's kind of multiple aqdar. So if you do this, could be the outcome. If you do that, that could be the outcome, and so on and so forth. And this is referred to in the Quran. Allah Ta'ala says, يَمْحُ اللَّهُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَيُثْبِتُ وَعِنْدَهُ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ. I got to remember the surah. Is it Surah Ibrahim, if I'm not mistaken? I can find the verse just in case folks want to refer to it. يَمْحُ اللَّهُ Ar-Ra'd, sorry. Surah Al-Ra'd is Surah 39. Surah 39, Ayah 39. And the verse translates, its meaning translates as, Allah erases or effaces whatever He wills and retains whatever He wills. And with Him is the mother of the book. So Allah effaces some things and removes them, and He keeps some things. And so this is subject to the qadr, to the actions of Allah's servants. Depending on what choices they make, Allah Ta'ala has... So it's not just a singular path. It can be like, these are all the paths that Abdullah could take. And based on this is their qadr. And the malaika execute according to that path that they take. And those paths can have branches. And the malaika execute according to those branches and the decisions and actions that they make. Does that make sense? So that is another layer of qadr, and we see that being referred to in numerous places in the Quran. For example, we have the qadr that is set at the time of conception. When the soul, not conception, at the time the soul is breathed into the fetus. Right? In the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the fetus is a nutfah 40 for 40, and then alaqa for 40, and then mudgha for 40, and then the malaika is sent like nutfa, like a drop of water. And then alaqa is like a clinging clot, and then mudgha is like a chunk of flesh, describing the stages of the embryo, and then the soul is breathed into him. This hadith has been debated in Islamic tradition. Is it literally 40 days? Or is this more of a timeline? Right? Is it literally 40? That's something issue. That's one issue. And then scientifically, like when does the heartbeat begin? That's also something I think, and I think it begins a lot earlier than 100. And is the heartbeat the sign that the soul is breathed into the soul? The soul is breathed into the fetus. It's a whole subject that scholars talk about. But there was a whole book I remember we took, one of our scholars wrote about on this topic, and he was writing about it in the context of scientific miracles. And these rules have an effect on ruling of abortion in Islam, because abortion is prohibited if the soul is, the infant, the fetus is alive. So how do you determine that? So there's fiqhi consequence to this. But it's a whole thing, right? But the point that I want to bring is the point on qadr, right? Predetermination or preordination of affairs. And then the angel is commanded to breathe the soul into the fetus. At some point, the soul is breathed into the fetus. And he is commanded to record كَتْبِ رِزْقِهِ, his sustenance, وَأَجَلِهِ, his lifespan, his gender, his sex, male or female, and وَشَقِيٌّ or sa'id. If it will be shaqi, miserable, meaning like among the people of hell, or sa'id, among the people of Jannah, happy. So this is a qadr that the malaika descend with at the time the soul is breathed into the child, or into the fetus. And then there's the annual qadr, the Laylatul Qadr, right? Every year. The decree of that year, Allah Ta'ala sends it down, and that's why Laylatul Qadr is a night of dua, because it's a night to change your qadr for the year. Right? So if your qadr was one thing, then it can be changed. And so we strive in the last nights of Ramadan that, Ya Allah, expand my provisions, Ya Allah, grant me health, Ya Allah, protect me from tragedies, Ya Allah, grant me well-being, Ya Allah, grant me all that is good in this world and the next, immediate and delayed. So in the night of Laylatul Qadr, we make these du'as. And so there's these other times, and so the malaika, they're distributing and they're executing the qadr of Allah, the decree of Allah Ta'ala, at these different times. And that takes us to the third part, which is the distribution of these aqdar at their different times. And then the fourth part, we said 4 levels, right? So Allah's knowledge of all things. Second is the recording of all affairs, and that refers to primarily Kitab. And then we said the malaika have their own records, and those can change. And third, the distribution of the qadr across time. And fourth is the execution of those aqdar at their times. Right? The qadr has been executed at every moment in time. Aqdar are being executed by the malaika, right? And so the execution of those aqdar throughout time. And so those are 4 levels of qadr that are a system, I guess, one way to kind of categorize the different aspects of belief in qadr.